Hi, in this video we'll continue where we left off from the previous video. I'll show you how to create variables, how to specify the flow of execution, and a few other things just to get you comfortable so that you have that down before we move on to the C++ module. So I've talked about the fact that this is a class that inherits now from here. You can see the parent class. This inherits from actor. So it would be nice if we could actually extend the functionality, right? That is what visual scripting is for. So similar to a text-based programming language such as C++ or something like that, C# and so on, we can go and create variables. You can think of a variable as some storage unit, some named storage unit, and they can store different types of data. And when a variable is created, the computer sets aside some memory depending on that data type. That memory location is then used to store and retrieve the information or that data at that memory location. And we can do stuff with that. We can get and set that. Firstly, you can actually use what you have in your components. So let's say the point light, for example, left click and drag and drop that into here. And now you can get a reference to that and you can use it now in your graph. Same with this cube. It actually shows up in your variables down here as well now under components. Okay, let's say we create a new variable. I'll left click on this plus button here. And now we can give it a name. I'll prefix that with a lowercase b so I can see that it is a boolean. And I'll just call it boolean demo. Now we have to compile it. And then we can go to the details panel and we can give it a default value. So I'll click on this checkbox here to set it true by default, compile and save. Now we can left click and drag and drop that. You can get it or you can set it. If you get that, then you basically get the value that it currently has to use in the graph. You can also, if I drag out again and you set that, this is what you'll use to change what that is set to. So if you want to change that from true to false, then you use the setter. Go and create one more variable, so click on plus variable. I'll create an integer in this case. So under variable type, I'll click this drop down and I'll select integer. We have to compile before we can change the value. So I'll compile first. Set that to some value. I'll enter 5 maybe, something like that. Compile and save. Drag and drop that into the world. I'll get that. Now I'd like to talk about the execution pins. So we can drag off from event begin play. So on begin play, I want something to happen. So I'll drag off from this here. This is the execution pin. This is what allows us to specify the flow of execution or the sequence of things that will happen. So once this is called or executed, this event begin play, then we can do a bunch of things. We can call a bunch of functions in sequence. So we can do print string, for example. Then I'll drag and drop from the output of this here, this green line that you'll get. This is a data output. You have input, so on this function, this here is an input. The colors of these things differ. So the integer here is green, this here is red, the boolean is red. Okay, so I'll drag and drop that onto that int string. You see you get a converter to convert that integer into some format that we can print out. We can click this drop down and change the duration to something like 10, for example. You can change the text color. You can do print screen, print to log. So let's say we don't care in this case to print to the log. I'll just go and delete that for now. I'll get the boolean. So these have check marks here on the print string. These inputs you can see are red. So that'll be an indicator to you that it can take in a boolean variable. You will also notice the check marks, that is true or false. If it is checked, then it is true, of course. And this here is a float actually, the duration. You can see you can type a value in there, whereas with the boolean you get a check mark. And with the color, you get this color wheel thing that you can go and change if you want. Right, so I'll just drag and drop that in here. This is set to true, so it will print to the screen. You can uncheck the log if you don't want to print to the log, for example. Alright, I'll just compile and save. And in this case, I'll just go and simulate, right? And it'll actually print out to the screen, but it's very small. I'll go back here. I'll click here and I'll do a string. You will notice that it will create the same type of variable that we have set previously. So in this case, it will be an integer. So integers might be useful for specifying an amount of coins that you have picked up in your level, your health maybe, whereas floats are useful for transitions, to move smoothly from one position to the next, and for working with vectors and rotators that we'll talk about a bit later. So I have the string demo. Again, we can go and change that here to a string. Now, string is basically just a collection of characters, such as your name, for example. Alright, so I'll go and compile that, type out some string. You'll see the color changes. I'll get that, and I'll go and print that out. Since it has the same color as this input data in this print string function, this, by the way, is a function. You can see f print string. So where events has this red, the functions will have this blue, and you'll see an f in there as well. Okay, so this here is the same type once again as this input on the print string. Compile and save that, and if I play now, that will print hello out. Okay, I'll go and create 3 more variables: vector, rotator, and transform. So I'll change the vector here to a vector. I'll just compile and save that. The rotator I'll change to a rotator, and the transform demo I'll change to a transform. If you hover over these, you'll actually get some tips. So with the transform, for example, this includes translation, rotation, and 3D scale. Once again, if you drag and drop those in as getters, these getter nodes, you will see the colors are once again different. Also, if you happen to click on one of these, you can go and add a comment. It's kind of persistent, so if you want to get rid of that again, you have this small toggle to toggle the comment bubble. Click on that and it'll go away. So I have these now. If I drag out, so the rotator, for example, and you do a setter, or the vector, you do a setter, you will see that you can enter 3 values. And you'll notice that those are float values. Float, once again, is 0.0, for example, or 0.3 repeating, or something like that. So rotator and a vector, as you can see, are essentially containers for 3 float variables, for x, y, and z, and we'll use those to move and rotate our objects around in the 3D world. The transform is a bit different. This combines translation, so 3D position, rotation, and scale. I'll just delete that actually. And let's use the integer as a demo, so I'll go and set that. You can press an Alt and then left click on an input or an output to break that connection. So press an Alt, left click over here to remove that connection. I'll just wire the integer back in again, so we print that out. Change the text color maybe to something like red. Maybe that's easier to see. And now we have the setter. Once we have printed that out, I want to set the integer to something else. Maybe something like 11. Then I want to print that out again. And we don't have to do another getter here. We can use the output from this and just put that in to the string. Just change the duration once more and just make it a bit darker maybe. Click OK. Yeah, actually this color here has not changed. You have to click OK, otherwise he's not going to recognize that. Click OK. Compile and save that. So this is how can you change the value that is stored within a variable. So first it'll print out 5, then 11. So that is how we change the value that is set or stored within a variable. Also notice how the flow of execution works. On event begin play, go and print this out, then go and set that integer to another value, then go and print that new value out. Of course, you can do your regular things that you might expect in another programming language. Greater than, for example, greater than or equal to. And so if that is true, you can see it's going to return a Boolean result from this calculation. You feed it two floats in this case, and it's going to return whether or not the one is greater than the other, and so on. Of course, you have tick here. Tick is going to fire off. This is going to be called every frame. And that is quite expensive, so it's best to do that in C++ and avoid using this if you can. I wanted to show you that you can get variables, you can set variables, and not just variables, but also references. So these will now be references to these subcomponents. So these are referred to as subcomponents. They are basically objects as opposed to simple variables that just contain, 1 or 2 or 5.5 and so forth. The pointlight, for example, has a bunch of variables and a transform actually as well. Alright, so those are objects that contain multiple variables and maybe even functions as well to change the state of that thing. So once again, in the C++ section, we'll learn more about blueprints as we go along. And then when Unreal Engine 5 comes out, I'd like to come back to blueprints and do a full-on series for blueprints, maybe with 1 or 2 small projects as well, that'll go into a lot more detail on the different types and programming in blueprints. But this is all you need for right now to follow along with the C++ stuff. So I hope you find this useful, and I'll see you in the next video.